The morning air in Blackridge felt like poison. A thick fog blanketed the land, turning the sun into a dim, pale circle in the grey sky. The streets of the small village were empty, except for the sound of a stranger's footsteps dragging a suitcase over the cobbled path. His name was Samuel Rourke, a city man who had accidentally lost his way during a long journey. He walked along the roadside lined with trees. His car had broken down, and he had no idea what was wrong with it. Deciding to walk in search of help, he noticed there were no vehicles passing by. Samuel cursed and yelled in frustration as time dragged on, until finally, hope flickered when he saw something in the distance. He quickened his pace, eager to reach it. A few moments later, Samuel stopped in front of an old wooden sign hanging at the entrance to the village. The inscription was nearly faded by time. "Welcome to Blackridge. Keep away from the forest." The last words were painted in red, like dried blood. The village seemed lifeless. No animals made a sound or roamed the streets, and only a handful of people went about their business. It was a scene far from what one would expect in a small village. But Samuel decided to continue. He needed somewhere to stay before nightfall. He had hoped to find a garage or at least someone who knew how to fix his car, but the villagers seemed unfriendly and unwilling to speak with him. With a sigh, Samuel kept walking. Eventually, he came across a small inn, with a loosely hanging sign that read "The Resting Hollow." The door creaked open slowly, like the scream of a dying creature. Inside, an old woman stood behind the counter. Her hair was grey, and her skin looked paper-thin. She greeted Samuel with a strange smile. "Do you have any rooms available?" Samuel asked bluntly. "There should be. I'm sure this little place isn't a favorite for tourists. The villagers don't seem to welcome outsiders either." Samuel almost answered his own question, throwing in a sharp, sarcastic tone. "You're an outsider, aren't you?" the woman asked, her voice raspy. She didn't seem disturbed by Samuel's words. Samuel nodded, feeling a bit uneasy. "Yeah, just looking for a place to stay for the night. I'll leave tomorrow morning." The woman nodded slowly, but there was something in her gaze that kept Samuel from shaking off his unease. Trying to ignore his discomfort, Samuel remembered his car. He decided to ask the woman for help. "I was wondering if anyone here could help me fix my car. I left it a bit far from here." "This is your bad day, young man," the woman answered, her response far from what he expected. "I know I'm lost, and my car's broken. That's why I need someone who can work on it. I'll pay, of course." It's not that," she interrupted him. "Tonight is when they appear." "They? Who are they?" Samuel asked, confused. "Don't go outside after sunset," the woman suddenly said, her voice turning serious. Instead of answering or explaining, she gave him a warning. "And whatever you do, don't listen to the sounds from the forest." Samuel swallowed hard. He was about to ask more, but the distant sound of an old bell interrupted their conversation. The bell tolled 3 times, low and heavy, adding to the oppressive atmosphere inside the inn. "They'll be out soon," the woman muttered quietly. "Who?" Samuel asked, now genuinely nervous. The woman didn't answer. She turned and walked away, leaving Samuel standing alone in the lobby. Strange. Samuel decided to ignore her and forget what she'd said. It had been a rough, frustrating day, and he needed to freshen up and rest. That night, after the sun had set, Samuel was woken by strange noises coming from outside his window. Footsteps, quick movements over gravel. He got out of bed and peeked outside. The fog was still thick, but he could barely make out a figure standing in the middle of the road. The person didn't move. They just stood there, staring at the inn. And then, the figure smiled. Too many teeth. Samuel felt his blood run cold. The smile wasn't normal. It stretched too wide, as though the figure's lips had been torn open to the sides of their face. Through the fog, Samuel saw an unsettling movement. The figure took a step backward, not in the usual way, but as if it were being dragged slowly into the mist. The backward step suddenly stopped. The figure stood still again, only a few meters farther than before, as if playing a game. Samuel backed away from the window, trying to steady his breath. Just my imagination. I'm too tired, he thought, but the cold shiver creeping down his neck told him otherwise. The footsteps sounded again, this time much closer. Samuel gripped the wood of the window ledge and peered out carefully. The figure had moved to the other side of the street, still staring, still smiling. A mix of fear and anger bubbled inside Samuel. He flung open the window. "Who are you? What do you want?" he shouted. "Silence." The fog thickened, swallowing Samuel's voice like a heavy cloth. But slowly, a soft sound emerged from the fog, a laugh high-pitched, like nails scratching against glass. It wasn't a normal human laugh. The figure began to change. The smile, once terrifying, now split wider, ripping the face like torn cloth. The inside was dark, like an endless hole. From the gap, other voices emerged, chaotic whispers as if coming from dozens of mouths. Panicked, Samuel backed away and slammed the window shut. As he turned to grab his suitcase, something thudded loudly against the window. Once, twice, 3 times. He turned his head. There was nothing outside, just the fog. But something had changed. The smile was now on the window, pressed against the glass, though there was no body behind it. Samuel collapsed onto the floor, terrified. Before he could think, a loud knock came from his bedroom door. Thud, thud, thud. Asterisk, asterisk. Open the door, an old woman's voice called from the lobby. Quickly, before they get in. Samuel's hands trembled as he fumbled with the lock. The old woman shoved the door open with surprising force and dragged him out of the room. "We need to get to the basement," she said urgently, offering no explanation. They hurried down the creaking wooden stairs to the inn's basement. The air was cold, damp, and reeked of mildew. The old woman lit a lantern, its dim light casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. "Listen to me," she said with urgency. "They know you're here now. You've seen them, which means you're part of their game." "Who are they?" Samuel asked, his voice shaky. The woman's gaze was hard to read, an unsettling mix of fear and resignation. "They aren't human. They're the guardians of Blackridge, ancient beings that protect this land. But they're also predators, and they choose their victims the way a butcher picks his livestock." Samuel tried to process what he'd just heard, but his mind refused to cooperate. "This is insane," he muttered. "You can't be serious." His skepticism was apparent. "This isn't nonsense. The legends are true." Samuel shook his head slowly. "I'm done with this. Let me go. I'm leaving this place." The old woman stepped closer, gripping his shoulder with a strength that defied her age. "No one leaves, boy. Not once they've seen you." Her voice was firm, laced with a grim finality. Samuel wanted to argue, but a noise cut through the tension, a shrill laugh, louder this time, from beyond the basement door. The floor above them trembled, as if something heavy was moving across it. "What is that?" Samuel asked. The old woman grabbed an object from the corner of the room, a rusty old axe. "Do you want to live?" she snapped. "Follow me. Don't stop, no matter what happens." "Is this really happening?" Samuel asked, still hesitant. "Listen, I'm sure you're from the city, where technology and knowledge flourish. But some things don't change with time. In remote places like this, those things can be real, more than just stories. So instead of doubting me, at least prepare yourself. It's not safe out there." Samuel nodded reluctantly, though his heart was filled with doubt. When the woman opened a small door in the corner of the basement, a gust of cold wind blew in, carrying the scent of damp earth and something rotting. Beyond the door was a narrow, dark passage that seemed to lead out of the village. "We have to reach the old church before the bell tolls again," she said. "If we're late, we're dead." Samuel had no choice. He followed the old woman, leaving the basement behind as the sounds in the fog grew closer, and the laughter turned into screams. The tunnel was long and narrow, its walls damp and the air heavy with decay. Samuel trailed the old woman, who moved quickly with the lantern in her hand. Its faint light was their only guide in the oppressive darkness. "What's out there?" Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman didn't answer right away. She checked each bend in the tunnel, as if ensuring they weren't being followed. Only after a few moments did she speak, her voice low and distant. "Creatures that guard this village. They've been here since before Blackridge existed. The locals call them the Hallowed Ones. They don't have a fixed form. They're shadows, sounds, the darkness itself." Samuel frowned, the story too far-fetched to believe. Yet what he'd seen earlier in the window left no room for skepticism. "Why me? What did I do wrong?" he demanded, his voice rising in frustration. The woman stopped abruptly, and Samuel nearly bumped into her. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a deep, unsettling fear. "You entered this village. That's reason enough. They're always searching for something, or someone. Maybe you were just unlucky." Samuel couldn't accept that. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet something so trivial was now being used as an excuse to hunt him. Something he didn't even fully understand, something they called a legend. Before he could ask more, a loud sound echoed from behind them, like something scraping along the tunnel. It wasn't footsteps, but the grating noise of long claws dragging against stone. "We need to move faster," the woman urged, pulling Samuel forward. "Don't look back, no matter what." But Samuel's curiosity outweighed his fear. He glanced over his shoulder, and what he saw froze him in place. From the darkness at the end of the tunnel, a figure emerged. No, not a figure, something resembling a human but fundamentally wrong. Its face looked like torn fabric stitched haphazardly together. Its eyes were empty sockets that stared unblinkingly. Its elongated body twisted unnaturally, as if its bones were shifting beneath its skin. "Oh my God, what is that?" Samuel asked, panic and terror lacing his voice. "Don't look," the woman screamed when she noticed Samuel had stopped. She grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. The creature began to move, not by walking but gliding, as though propelled by an invisible wind. The sound it made grew clearer now, a mixture of shrieking and laughter that pierced the air, haunting their every step. They ran, but the tunnel seemed endless. Samuel's breaths came in ragged gasps, fear gripping him tighter with every passing second. At every turn, he felt the creature closing in, though he dared not look again. "Will we make it to the church?" Samuel asked, panic evident in his voice. The woman didn't respond. But as they rounded another corner, Samuel saw something ahead, a faint, flickering red light. "There's the door," the woman shouted, clutching the lantern tightly. "We're almost there." The creature's wails grew louder, like a wolf's howl cutting through the night. The tunnel walls began to shake, and parts of them crumbled, sending dust swirling into the air. Samuel and the woman leapt out of the collapsing corridor, just as its last remnants crumbled into dust. They landed in a muddy patch of ground, facing an ancient, decrepit building, a small church with a crooked cross atop its roof. Its peeling paint and cracked windows gave it an eerie, forsaken appearance. The red light Samuel had noticed earlier emanated from one of its shattered windows. But there was no time for relief. Behind them, from the rubble of the corridor, the creature emerged once more, this time larger, its elongated body filling the gap entirely, its head scraping the ceiling. Its blade-like teeth gleamed menacingly in the dim light. The woman grabbed Samuel by the arm and dragged him toward the church door. Using all her strength, she shoved the heavy wooden door open and forced him inside. The door slammed shut with a deafening thud, and the creature's guttural shriek abruptly ceased. Samuel collapsed onto the dusty floor, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. He scanned the dim interior of the church, its air thick with decay and abandonment. A massive inverted cross hung above the altar, and the walls were adorned with strange, ancient carvings that seemed to hum with a quiet menace. "Is this place safe?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The woman didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the altar, her expression distant, as though she were seeing something invisible to him. "There's no such thing as safe in Blackridge," she said at last. "But here, at least, they won't attack directly." Samuel frowned. "Why not?" The woman finally turned to him, her eyes carrying a weight that made him uneasy. "Because this church," she whispered, "is where they found what they were looking for, long ago." Samuel had no time to ask what she meant. Heavy footsteps echoed from behind the altar, shattering the fragile moment of stillness. They moved deeper into the church, the woman clutching a heavy axe that made Samuel's stomach churn with unease. His mind raced as fragments of the nightmare they'd just escaped replayed in his head, the grotesque creature, its horrifying presence. It all felt far too real to be a prank or some elaborate hoax. The thudding footsteps grew louder, reverberating through the desolate church. Samuel felt the air shift, each breath heavier than the last. The woman gripped her axe tighter, her eyes locked on the shadows emerging from behind the altar. "Who's there?" Samuel stammered, his voice trembling. The woman raised a finger to her lips, a silent command to stay quiet. The figure that emerged was no priest or caretaker. It was a humanoid shape, its face concealed by a blood-stained black cloth. Its emaciated body seemed barely human, with sharp protruding bones beneath its gray, withered skin. Its hands, however, were unnaturally large, the fingers long and claw-like. It stood silently before the altar, appearing to scrutinize them. "Don't move," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "If you move, it'll see you." Samuel froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The creature hissed, a chilling sound, like a snake's warning mixed with a guttural growl. Slowly, it stepped closer, each footfall making the creaking floorboards groan under its weight. He wanted to scream, but fear had stolen his voice. Sweat dripped down his temple. "Is that one of the hollowed ones?" he whispered shakily. The woman didn't reply. She only bowed her head, gripping her axe as if bracing for the worst. The creature stopped just feet away, tilting its head as though studying them. From beneath its veil came a raspy, broken voice. "Why have you come here?" Samuel flinched. The creature could speak. Its voice was deep and jagged, as if shards of glass were grinding in its throat. "What do you want from us?" Samuel asked, his voice quivering as he fought to maintain composure. The creature didn't answer right away. Instead, it raised a skeletal hand and pointed directly at Samuel. "You," it rasped, then let out a low, sinister chuckle that echoed like the crack of breaking bones. "You brought them here. You are the way." Samuel staggered back, horrified by its words. "I don't understand," he cried. The woman finally spoke, her voice sharp and cold. "He's a marker. The creature knows they've targeted you. You're the reason they've returned to this church." The creature laughed again, louder this time, a sound not of mirth, but of something ancient and malevolent. "You all belong to us," it declared. "Before the night ends, your blood will be the offering." Suddenly, the creature lunged forward. The woman swung her axe without hesitation, aiming for its neck, but the blade cut through nothing but empty air. The creature dissolved into a mist, vanishing as though it had never been there. "Run," the woman shouted, yanking Samuel toward the church's far corner. Before they could move far, the church's massive bell tolled. Its deep, resonant chime rattled their bones, filling the air with an ominous presence. With the sound came shadows, seeping from the church's corners like black ink spilling across the floor. The shadows moved unnaturally fast, coalescing into grotesque forms, twisted bodies and eyeless faces that radiated malice. Samuel screamed as one of the shadowy figures lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Its claw-like appendages tore at his chest, trying to drag him into the encroaching darkness. "Kill it," the woman shouted, tossing the axe to him. With trembling hands, Samuel grabbed the weapon and swung it wildly at the shadow. The blade struck true, emitting a strange burst of light as it connected. The shadow screeched in agony before dissolving into black mist. "To the altar," the woman yelled. "It's the only place that can hold them off, at least for now." They ran toward the altar, but the shadows multiplied, filling the room like a tidal wave. Samuel and the old woman barely made it to the altar when one of the shadows leaped onto her back, clawing at her neck. The woman screamed and collapsed to the floor. Blood gushed from her neck, staining the worn wooden floorboards. "Oh, damn it," Samuel muttered, rushing to help her, but she weakly pushed him away with trembling hands. "Forget about me," she rasped. "You have to go." Samuel hesitated for a moment, but as more shadows closed in, he had no choice. Gripping his axe tightly, he vaulted over the altar and headed for the door behind it. As he opened the door, he found a spiral staircase descending into darkness. From below, eerie sounds rose, whispers, like thousands of voices speaking at once. Samuel swallowed hard. There was no time to think. With the haunting laughter of the shadows echoing behind him, he started down the narrow staircase, descending into deeper darkness. The stairs seemed endless. Each step creaked loudly, the sound reverberating in the oppressive silence. The whispers from below grew clearer, forming incomprehensible words. Occasionally, he felt something brush against his arm, but when he turned, there was nothing, only shadows dancing on the cold stone walls. Samuel didn't stop. His breathing was ragged, his mind racing, but one thing was clear: going back up meant death. What the hell is this? None of this makes any sense. Finally, he reached the bottom and found himself in a massive chamber lit by a pulsating red glow, as though emanating from a giant beating heart. The walls were etched with crude symbols, the same ones he had seen in the church earlier. What now? Am I even on the right path? In the center of the room stood a massive black stone altar. Draped over it was a white cloth, stained with blood. Surrounding the altar were 5 grotesque statues, each depicting twisted, deformed creatures with warped bodies and disfigured faces. Samuel approached the altar cautiously, gripping his axe tightly. The whispers grew louder, coming from every direction. As he got closer, the white cloth began to move. He stepped back quickly, raising his axe, ready for whatever lay beneath. The cloth lifted slowly, as if tugged by invisible hands. What it revealed made Samuel's stomach churn. It was a human body, or what was left of one. The skin was torn, the flesh exposed, and the internal organs rearranged unnaturally. But the face, though mangled, was still recognizable. "The old woman," Samuel whispered, horrified. It was the same woman who had just been with him in the church. But how could that be? He had left her upstairs. What the hell? How is she here? Samuel's head spun as he tried to process the impossible. Damn it, I should have gone back upstairs, not down here. Suddenly, one of the statues around the altar moved. The one with a head shaped like a deer's skull turned toward him. Its hollow eyes glowed red, and a sound like cracking bones came from its mouth. "You have come to complete the cycle," the creature said, its voice deep and resonant, like it came from the bowels of the earth. Samuel stepped back, gripping his axe tighter. "What are you talking about? What is all this?" The statue stepped forward as the others began to writhe, as though coming to life. "Blackridge is a place of waiting," it continued. "Blood must flow. Souls must be claimed. It is the covenant made before the dawn of human existence." Samuel shook his head, trying to make sense of it. A covenant? With who? The creature didn't answer. Instead, the other statues began emitting strange sounds, a mix of laughter and screams. They moved closer, forming a circle around him. The red light in the room intensified. On the altar, the old woman's body began to twitch. Though clearly dead, her arms lifted, and her hollow eyes fixed on Samuel. "You are the final key," the deer-headed creature said. "We have awaited your blood to complete the cycle. But you will not be given a choice. The wait has been far too long." Samuel roared in frustration. "What the hell does that mean? I'm not even from this damned village. Why am I involved in this?" His anger flared. He wasn't about to accept being dragged into something he had nothing to do with. He wasn't a part of this cursed place. He had stumbled upon it by accident, merely looking for shelter for the night, and now everything had spiraled into madness. "Get the hell away from me," he shouted, swinging his axe at the nearest statue. But the blade bounced off, leaving no mark. The creature laughed, a booming sound that echoed like war drums. Realizing that reason had no place here and that his life was in imminent danger, Samuel knew he had to leave. "I have to get out of here," he thought desperately. His eyes scanned the room, searching for an escape route. To his right, he spotted an open corridor. Without hesitation, Samuel bolted toward it. The statues tried to block his path, but their massive forms moved too slowly. He slipped past them and darted into the corridor. This new passageway was narrower and darker. The whispers were gone, replaced by the steady drip of water echoing in the silence. The corridor grew darker still until Samuel could see nothing. But he pressed on, praying this path would lead him out of the nightmare called Blackridge. In the distance, he saw a faint green light. He quickened his pace, hope flickering in his chest. But the closer he got to the light, the more he realized something was wrong. The light didn't feel comforting. He heard footsteps again, but this time they matched his own, too perfectly, like an echo that wasn't his. He stopped. The sound stopped too. Turning slowly, he saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was himself. But the figure's face was wrong. It had no eyes, and its mouth stretched into an unnaturally wide grin, like the creature he had seen outside the window that night. The shadow advanced, and all Samuel could do was scream. Samuel's scream echoed through the narrow corridor, but it felt trapped, ricocheting aimlessly between the stone walls. A shadowy figure resembling his own crept closer, each movement unnervingly wrong, like a puppet manipulated by unseen strings. "Who are you?" Samuel shouted, raising his axe, his hands trembling. The shadow didn't answer. Its mouth remained fixed in a grotesque grin, far too wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. From the hollow sockets of its eyes, a thick black liquid oozed slowly, dripping to the floor. Samuel staggered back, his spine pressing against the cold stone wall. There was no way out except forward, toward the green light at the end of the corridor. Yet every step he took felt like heading into a trap, the sound of the shadow's footsteps mirroring his every move. The shadow stopped a few meters away, its form twitching unnaturally, as if struggling to maintain its shape. "You're not the first victim," it said, its voice an eerie blend of laughter and sobbing. "But you will be the last." Without warning, the shadow lunged at Samuel with inhuman speed. Samuel yelled and swung his axe with all his strength. The blade cleaved through the shadow, but there was no blood, no flesh, only darkness spilling out like smoke. The shadow shrieked but didn't stop. Its claw-like hands wrapped around Samuel's throat, choking him with terrifying force. Samuel thrashed, struggling to fight back as his vision blurred. Desperate, his hand found the small lantern hanging from his belt. Summoning every ounce of strength, he smashed it against the shadow's head. The glass shattered, and the tiny flame inside erupted into a fierce blaze. The shadow released Samuel, screeching in agony as the fire consumed its dark form. Samuel collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, while the shadow writhed like a burning serpent before vanishing entirely. But the corridor offered no respite. The green light at the end grew brighter, and Samuel felt as if the walls around him were beginning to shift, closing in. Forcing himself to his feet despite his trembling legs, he gripped his axe tightly and trudged toward the light. Every step felt heavier, as though some unseen force was holding him back. When he finally reached the corridor's end, he found himself in a small circular chamber. The walls were covered in strange carvings that seemed to move, pulsating like living things. At the room's center stood an ancient well, radiating the green glow. Samuel cautiously approached the well. Peering inside, he froze in terror. Inside the well was a vision of another world, a warped version of Blackridge village. The sky was blood red, the ground littered with rotting corpses, and in the village square stood a towering figure resembling one of the statues he had seen earlier. But what horrified him most was his own image standing in the village center, surrounded by villagers with empty, soulless eyes. "This is your destiny," a voice echoed through the chamber. Samuel spun around and saw a man clad in a black robe standing in the corner. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his voice dripped with authority and malice. "You will become the bridge between this world and theirs," the man continued. "They have chosen you." Samuel tightened his grip on the axe. "No one chooses for me," he shouted. "I won't let this happen." The robed man chuckled softly. "Your resistance is futile. They never lose. They always win. And you," he pointed a long bony finger at Samuel, "you belong to them now." The chamber walls began to crack, and the sound of whispering filled the air, louder and more deafening. From the well, grotesque figures with elongated limbs and disfigured faces began to crawl out, their hollow eyes fixed on Samuel. He stepped back, but there was no escape. Swinging his axe wildly, he fought against the approaching creatures. For every one he struck down, 2 more emerged from the well. Desperation consumed him. Samuel screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice swallowed by the cacophony. The chamber collapsed, the walls crumbling into rubble, and darkness enveloped everything. When all fell silent, a single voice lingered. "Wait for the next cycle." And then nothing. Samuel awoke with a gasp, his chest heaving. Sweat soaked his body, and his heart thundered in his ears. He wasn't in the corridor or the chamber with the well anymore. He now lay on creaking wooden floorboards, surrounded by dimly lit candles. "What is this?" he whispered, struggling to sit up. Looking around, he found himself in what appeared to be a large, dark storeroom. The windows were boarded up, and the candles formed a pattern on the floor, a circle inscribed with intricate symbols in an ancient language. His body felt unbearably heavy, as though something was pressing down on him from within. Every movement was sluggish, like trudging through a nightmare. "Samuel." The soft yet chilling voice came from the shadows, carrying the weight of death itself. Samuel turned quickly, his axe, still inexplicably in his grasp, raised defensively. From the darkness emerged the same robed figure. His face remained obscured, but this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a legion of shapeless entities, mere silhouettes with glowing red eyes that bore into Samuel without blinking. "This is your final step," the robed man said. "You were chosen from the beginning. Every path you took, every decision, it all led you here." Samuel shook his head vehemently. "Stop with the bullshit." The man's quiet laughter echoed through the room. He raised his hand, and the symbols on the floor began to glow with a pulsating red light. An unbearable heat filled the space, and Samuel felt as if something inside him was being torn apart. Falling to his knees, he dropped the axe. A writhing sensation surged through his body, as if serpents were coiling around his organs, fighting to break free. His scream was a grotesque mix of human agony and something unnatural. "Let me go," he roared. The robed man stepped closer.